Viewers, welcome back to the PI show. Prior to the break, I indicated we're going to have a fellow from DV Experts, Dr. Shane Richardson, to talk to us about an accident reconstruction. Now, Dr. Shane Richardson's from Delta V Experts. He's got a PhD in structural engineering, Master of Science and Bachelor of Engineering. Good evening, Shane. How are you?
Not bad, Tony. Thank you very much for having me on.
And tonight, Shane, we're going to be talking about a child cyclist that was hit by a vehicle in Western Australia. We can't mention a child's name for obvious reasons.
No, we can't.
There was minimal damage done to the vehicle and the bike, yet there was major injury suffered by the victim. Tell us a bit more about what happened.
In this case, what's happened is that a child was riding home, and as a result of being, or they were found on the side of the road, and it wasn't explained as to how the crash had occurred. But they sustained quite severe spinal injuries. And it really needed to be investigated to work out, did they fall off the bike? Were they hit by a car? There was a large public awareness campaign that put out to request for information, and subsequently a gentleman came forward and identified that he was driving a car. But he did say he was travelling very slowly.
Shane, just on that, the injuries sustained by the child weren't consistent with just falling off the bike, were they?
No, they weren't. She sustained quite severe spinal injuries, and it was a question of, was the driver driving at the speed limit or beyond the speed limit? How much did he contribute to the crash?
Don, what's the significance of determining what happened with this child?
Well, if it happened in Victoria, the significance was if there was a vehicle involved, the child would be entitled to receive benefits from the Transport Accident Commission, which includes no-fault benefits such as medical expenses, loss of wages if the child was incapacitated for employment 18 to 21, and also lump sum impairment benefits, but also common law rights.
But common law rights would be absolutely significant in a case like this one, wouldn't it?
Sounds like it would have been. It sounds like the child sustained very significant injuries, spinal cord injuries. And Shane, there was no witnesses?
No witnesses.
Even though it was after school?
Yes.
So no one's come forward, and the driver didn't come forward until after tests were done?
Well, not after a test, but after a public campaign. How did this crash happen?
But Shane, did you, sorry to interrupt you,
No.
Did you conduct your own tests using a pig?
Yes, we did. We were able to, in some other work that we were doing, we were able to recreate and simulate the crash scenario to illustrate what sort of damage could occur in the event of someone being hit by a car, travelling at, in this case, at about 64 kilometres an hour. You can see from the video that there's a severe impact, and especially the spinal loading that occurs on it. We used a deceased pig because it had the same body mass as the child had at the time of the crash, and it's a good surrogate for a person to provide an illustrative example of the crash and how the crash dynamics.
And just after you did all of that, did it go to air in terms of there was a public appeal in relation to the accident? No. The crash had occurred. The girl was found on the side of the road, and as a result of that, the police put out a request. Did anyone see anything that's happening? And that's when the driver came forward after that. So when did you do your reconstruction? Before the driver came forward or after the driver came forward?
After the driver had come forward, because there was an issue about speed. How fast was he going? He was claiming that he was travelling relatively slowly, and there wasn't a lot of damage to the car. And so the purpose of the test was to illustrate at different speeds what type of damage do you get to the vehicle, which is quite benign for the load and the mass. How much damage do you get to the bike? Not a lot of damage to the bike.
And Don, the significance of that is, if he's saying he's going slow, it looks like the girl was at fault. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's right. The girl felt, probably the incident happened after. If there was an impact, she'd fallen off and caused the majority of injuries, or most of the injuries by falling off. But
and Don, there would have been an issue about negligence and possibly contributory negligence. Is that why it's significant to get the test done?
Well, I think so. And I think in this case too, you can see there was no damage, or some damage, very limited damage to the bike. Now, Shane, even one of the videos we've seen, you're going about 64 kilometres, which is very high impact, but still no damage to the bike. Even if it was going faster, it probably wouldn't be any damage to the bike
Yes, that's correct. You don't get a lot of, it really depends on the crash circumstances, but in the way in which this was reconstructed and looked at, you don't get a lot of damage to the actual bike itself. You may get some damage to the rear tyres and the rear wheel of the bike. You may get some scraping and some distortion damage to the handlebars of the bike. But if it gets knocked clear and doesn't get driven over subsequent to the crash, the damage to the bike won't be significant.
Assuming this driver didn't come forward, would that put a different spin on the whole case?
Well, again, you'd be left with the evidence of a child with a bad spinal injury, limited damage to the bike. Did she fall off? Did she not fall off? That's more a question for the lawyers and how they're going to argue.
And Don, just on that question too, if the driver didn't come forward, there wouldn't be an issue of contributory negligence, correct?
No, or hit and run, Tony.
That's right.
Guilty
so
conscience.
the blame would have gone to the driver.
Well, that's right. I mean, it sounds like in that case anyway, there was all to blame on the driver because he didn't come forward until there was a public outcry. But if it was a hit and run, then it would be very difficult to say there's any contributory negligence, I would have thought, Tony.
Tom, what sort of money are we talking for a girl of this age? She was very, very young.
Well, without knowing the exact details of the injuries,
she's got significant
extent, the maximum you can get in Victoria is around the $480,000 for pain and suffering only, and I think an injury like that would go. Loss of income is over $1 million maximum, so I would think she was very close, so if not the statutory maximum in Victoria.
Shane, do you recall what the parents did for a living?
Her father was a tradesman. Her mother worked part-time.
Was there other siblings that had...
She had two older sisters.
And what were they doing?
At the time of the crash,
they
were at school. Oh, well, they were still in school, but they... Yes.
So, Don, how would you assess her for loss of
earnings? In those circumstances, you look at, like Tony just mentioned, that you look at siblings, parents, what they did, what they're likely to earn. Sounds like tradespeople will earn a bit of money, so hard workers. So in those circumstances, you'll say she could have been something along those lines in terms of earning capacity.
Or she could have been a professional in,
could have been a professional.
A lot of the migrants, the parents come over, and the children went on to higher education, correct?
That's right.
So at the very least, you're starting with average weekly earnings. Is that correct?
Yeah, which is over $800 at the moment, Tony. So so it's a significant amount.
And Shane, in relation to your testing, tell us a bit more about it. What exactly did you do?
It was for a conference that was being run in Tasmania for a group of lawyers, the Insurance Law Association, and they provided us with some vehicles. They provided us with some deceased pigs, so there was no pigs hurt other than they were already dead. And we used them not only for this, but we also did some run-over tests and some other impact tests that were carried out on the day.
We also did one which will show some footage of where there was a pig that you ran over in a four-wheel drive.
Yes.
Now, what was the significance of that?
It's to illustrate how much a body moves having been driven over. So there's been a couple of cases that we've looked at where bodies have been found in a position on the roadway, and the question is this their impact point, or is this their rest position after they've been impacted?
We've got to go to a sponsors break, viewers, so please stay tuned. After the break, we'll continue this discussion, but we're also going to see the use of black box recorders in vehicles and how effective they can be. So please stay tuned.